In this podcast episode, Joe Rogan engages in a conversation with Patrick Bet David, the founder of PHP Agency, Inc. They discuss various topics, including politics, the Democratic Party, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, election fraud, and the power of podcasting. The conversation begins with a reflection on their last podcast together, which took place 2 years prior in September 2021. They discuss the changes that have occurred since then, particularly in the political landscape. They express their admiration for Joe Biden as the president and speculate on whether he will make it to the 2024 elections. The discussion then shifts to Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, and his recent campaign ads. They analyze the potential motives behind Newsom's fundraising efforts and suggest that he may be positioning himself as a potential replacement for Biden if he steps down. They also discuss the marketing mistakes made by Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, and question his ability to compete with Trump. The conversation delves into the complexities of politics and the Democratic Party. They draw parallels between Andrew Cuomo and Biden, highlighting the fickleness of the party and its willingness to eliminate candidates who cannot be controlled. They speculate on the potential reasons for Biden stepping down, including health issues and corruption scandals. The hosts also discuss Tucker Carlson and his potential political aspirations. They analyze his marketability and the impact he could have if he were to run for president. They praise his ability to expose corruption and challenge mainstream narratives on his television show. The conversation then turns to the topic of election fraud. They acknowledge that election fraud exists to some extent and discuss the vulnerabilities of voting machines. They question the logic behind opposing voter ID requirements while simultaneously implementing strict ID checks for other activities, such as air travel and vaccine verification. They highlight the hypocrisy of certain political positions, such as prioritizing climate change and white supremacy over other pressing issues. They argue that the government's inconsistencies and double standards contribute to public skepticism and paranoia. The discussion continues with a focus on the power of podcasting as a platform for open and honest discussions. They discuss the importance of challenging mainstream narratives and providing alternative perspectives. They emphasize the need for critical thinking and independent research to navigate the complex political landscape. The conversation then shifts to the topic of climate change. They express skepticism about the extent of human influence on climate change and question the effectiveness of proposed solutions. They argue that the focus on climate change detracts from other pressing issues, such as poverty and inequality. The hosts also discuss the topic of gender identity and its impact on society. They express concern about the influence of teachers in promoting certain ideologies in schools and the potential consequences of encouraging certain behaviors at a young age. They argue for a balanced approach that respects individual rights while also considering the potential risks and consequences. The conversation continues with a discussion about the COVID-19 vaccine. They acknowledge the importance of transparency and accountability in the medical field. They mention individuals who have been injured by the vaccine and argue for more research and open dialogue on the topic. They emphasize the need for individuals to make informed decisions based on their own research and personal circumstances. Bet David goes on to criticize the handling of the AIDS crisis, particularly the use of a chemotherapy medication called ZT that was used to treat HIV patients. He claims that the medication was ineffective and caused more harm than good, leading to the deaths of many individuals. Bet David also draws parallels between the demonization of certain COVID-19 treatments, such as ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, and the profit-driven nature of the pharmaceutical industry. He argues that the emergency use authorization of COVID-19 vaccines was contingent on there being no other effective treatments available, leading to the suppression of alternative options. The discussion then shifts to the possibility of interviewing Donald Trump. Bet David expresses his desire to see Rogan interview Trump, suggesting that it would be a significant event in the podcasting world. He argues that it would be strange if Rogan, as one of the most influential podcasters, never interviewed Trump, given the impact he has had on politics and the media. Bet David believes that such an interview would challenge the mainstream narrative and potentially reveal new information about various topics, including JFK, aliens, and vaccine safety. Rogan acknowledges the interest in a Trump interview but states that he interviews people based on his own curiosity and not for the sake of numbers or popularity. He emphasizes the importance of genuine interest in the guest and their ideas. While he does not dismiss the idea of interviewing Trump, Rogan does not commit to it either. The conversation then delves into the influence of major financial institutions, such as BlackRock and Vanguard, on various industries, including defense contracts, Hollywood, and pharmaceuticals. Bet David highlights the significant control these institutions have over the economy and argues that their interests often align with those of the political establishment. He suggests that their influence extends to education and unions, citing the example of the National Education Association, the largest teachers' union in the United States. Bet David discusses the concept of open society and the funding behind organizations that promote it. He highlights the influence of billionaire George Soros and his Open Society Foundation, which has received $32 billion in funding over the past 30 years. Bet David expresses concern about the power these organizations have and their ability to control various aspects of society. He explains that these organizations, such as State Street, Vanguard, and BlackRock, have significant influence and can make companies fire boards, replace CEOs, and even replace leaders if they don't align with their agenda. Bet David questions who the real people in power are and whether these organizations are truly running the world. He also discusses the issue of monopolies and the concentration of power in the hands of a few companies. He points out that 88% of S&P 500 companies have one of these three companies as their largest shareholder, which he considers a form of monopoly. He argues that this concentration of power needs to be addressed and broken apart to restore competition and prevent undue influence. Bet David believes that these organizations, such as BlackRock and Vanguard, are using environmental, social, and governance scores as a means of control. He suggests that companies need to adhere to certain guidelines and criteria set by these organizations in order to receive funding or be nominated for awards. This, in turn, influences decision-making processes and dilutes the ability to make choices based on what is best for the company. He sees this as a premeditated strategy to gain control over corporations and society as a whole. By dictating the terms and criteria for funding and recognition, these organizations can shape the direction and behavior of companies. Bet David argues that this control is not based on the best interests of the company or society, but rather on the agenda of these organizations. He emphasizes the importance of recognizing who the real heroes are in society and the need to sell the dream of a bright future. Bet David believes that the current focus on victimhood and social justice is confusing and detrimental to society. He calls for a return to recognizing the value of individuals and their contributions, rather than promoting certain groups or identities as heroes. Bet David then discusses the impact of regional banks and how they benefit from certain policies. He argues that the idea that bigger companies don't want to raise the minimum wage is a misconception, as it is actually small business owners who cannot afford to do so. He believes that minimum wage should be different in different states, as the cost of living varies. He also points out that raising the minimum wage for larger companies like Amazon can have negative consequences for small businesses, as they may struggle to compete and may have to raise prices, ultimately hurting consumers. The conversation then shifts to the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on small businesses. Bet David highlights the emotional toll of small business closures, comparing it to attending a funeral. He emphasizes the hard work and sacrifice that many small business owners put into their businesses and the devastating impact of losing them. The discussion then turns to politics and the 2020 presidential election. Bet David expresses his disappointment with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, whom he had high hopes for but believes missed the mark. He praises former President Donald Trump and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for their willingness to challenge the establishment and suggests that the Democratic Party may need to replace Joe Biden with someone like California Governor Gavin Newsom to have a chance against Trump in the next election. Overall, the podcast covers a range of topics related to politics, the economy, and personal stories. Bet David offers his insights and opinions on these subjects, highlighting the importance of small businesses, the impact of government policies, and the need for political figures who challenge the status quo. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe.